In conversation with us right here at Davos is Mr. Anand Mahindra. You are a Davos veteran. You've seen many people come and make a pitch here in Davos. The Prime Minister is now here to make a pitch for India. What is unique about this pitch?
First of all, I'm still coping with your definition of being a Davos veteran. Made me sound like I've joined some retirement community. I hope it's not that.
Not at all.
But my expectations, they're very high, to be very honest. An Indian Prime Minister has come here after 20 years.
That's right.
And if you look at what the Prime Minister himself has said about his reasons for coming here, he's recognized that this is maybe one of the largest caravanserais in the world. It's like a caravan gathering, as I like to say. In the old days, when caravans went out and the camels went out, they stopped at an oasis, and that oasis had everything you needed. It had water, it had company, it had commerce. So in that sense, Davos is very much like that.
Yeah.
He recognized that for whatever it's worth, you get at one shot a global audience.
That's right.
And I think he's intelligent enough to know that that this is an opportunity not to be missed when we are at a very, very important juncture in the growth of the Indian economy. So he's going to come here not to gloat that we are the largest, we have done this. He's come taking a risk, coming at a time when the economy is recovering from certain major reforms, initial reforms. But he's coming to say that I'm confident. And I think it's a very good move because as a businessman, I can tell you that the economy is recovering. So people will look back and say, Mr. Modi was right.
You know, I will talk to you about the recovering economy and are we making too much of this or are we being too pessimistic in just a bit from here. But just on the Prime Minister's visit, I mean, his big pitch, of course, is he's trying to woo the global investor and he's here with that. He comes armed with a World Bank ranking that has gone up. He comes armed with Moody's upgrading us. He comes armed. Yes, and he comes with industrial production gone up. He also comes armed with GST that has been rolled out for its obvious, issues. GST is a big reform that is rolled out. Do you believe this is pitch enough to attract capital? Or will the global audience want him to talk and commit on land, labor, other structural reforms like that?
Look, everyone's going to push their luck and
right.
try and get him to commit on something. I think he's a seasoned player of those kinds of questions. So let's see. Maybe he'll surprise us all and actually commit on something. But I don't think that's what we're looking forward to. What people want to see is how comfortable is this leader? How confident does he look? How confident does he sound? And they know that he is politically very secure. So that in itself makes him a big draw. Often when people come to hear European leaders, they're wondering whether that leader will be in power 6 months later or not. They're seeing one leader in the world who is going to be very secure in his position and democratically so. So therefore that itself is enough of a draw because stability politically augurs well for growth. So I think there'll be no problem of people interested in seeing him and hearing him. What they want to see is his body language. So I don't think we should worry too much about the content. It's also simply his being here and projecting confidence about the Indian economy will go a long way.
No, absolutely, and that's what he will be judged for. But he also comes at a time when the world is increasingly looking inward. We have an America that's the antipathy to globalization. America is not to be missed. Mr. Xi Jinping came and made a very bold claim of espousing globalization during Davos last year. And obviously, Mr. Modi will perhaps be compared to Mr. Xi Jinping, who did make that trip. I have two questions. A, do you believe it's too early for India to stake claim to be a more relevant economic global power and espouse globalization even more than we have? And B, do you believe there will be these obvious comparisons made? Are we going to be foolish enough to start comparing ourselves to China just yet?
Look,
premature?
Comparing ourselves we should always do. If we say we are equal to China, that might be premature. We have a long way to go. And don't forget, our reform process started many, many years after China's reform process. They had at least a decade on us. So there is no reason to feel shy about being behind China. We started our reforms later. The fact, though, is that should we be here? Are we ready to be counted as one of the largest economic forces? No, I think that probably is a rhetorical question. We are already this year going to become the 5th largest economy in dollar terms.
That's right.
And very shortly, I think 2032, they're saying we'll become the 3rd largest. So the world is watching, and this is being stated not by Indians. This is being stated by think tanks overseas. So people are waiting and watching to see how will India finally live up to the potential that it's always had.
And the big tailwind that goes in our favor is global growth that has picked up, and that will help exports and all of that. I'll just come to that in a bit. But Indian markets, many people believe, are perhaps irrationally euphoric. Davos is extremely euphoric about India. Do our fundamentals justify this euphoria? I mean, we are perhaps a nation in the making, so to say, as far as economic power is concerned. But are these fundamentals justifying the euphoria that we're seeing?
You know, I'm probably the complete opposite of Dr. Doom or Dr. Gloom. I can't live that way. I think it would be awful to live there constantly questioning, is this right? Are we worse off than we are? No. I think sometimes the way a nation's optimism itself results in positive outcomes. What they call animal spirits. This is an economically measured quantity. Psychology, animal spirits have an impact on the economy. In fact, one of the reasons why our economy has been a little sluggish is because people have been suffering a little from a lack of confidence.
Yes.
So I think just the act of a Prime Minister coming here, making some very bold statements in front of a globally handpicked audience, that itself should go to raise animal spirits back in India.
Just when we talk about raising animal spirits back home in India, what is it going to take for the Indian corporates to begin investing? One of the sore points of 2017, even though we did see structural reforms, growth just beginning to pick up, is that private investment, the needle hasn't moved on that. What has to change in 2018 for the needle to move on that?
You know, business people are very rational creatures. Why would anyone invest? You invest because you see a return out there.
That's right, yes.
If you're seeing an economy that seems to be shaky, or you don't see a rapidly growing economy, there's no reason to invest. Ironically, inflation is also usually a positive force for business people to invest. When inflation is very low, it becomes harder to make a
That's
return.
right, yes.
Inflation, in fact, allows businessmen to make a return which comes automatically. When you invest, your assets appreciate, and therefore your return comes to that. So interestingly, we are coming to that convergence where, because demand is picking up, inflation is picking up, you are going to see growth. As I've said very often in the past few months, we are seeing signs of recovery in the rural markets as well, which are a great demand pull. So I think the combination of a little bit of inflation, combination of the economy growing again, and ironically, oil prices people are worried about. But you know, all the countries abroad which were oil producing countries, their slump was not good for India.
Absolutely.
It reduced our export market. So the global growth is going to be more robust. That has also been predicted. Now those three elements are conspiring to make investors want to invest again. All that's needed, I think, to move that flywheel is really public sector investment of the government, and that actually has been happening through the road construction, and perhaps the government needs to make some more infrastructure investments just to make that flywheel move.
Would you put a time frame to this? 6 months, a year, 2 quarters?
I think we're already seeing an uptick. So I would say that by another 6 months from now, there's going to be far more confidence, a widespread confidence that the economy is recovering.
One of the things that will obviously move the needle and the flywheel that you say obviously is credit offtake, and the government has put significant amount of its political capital to this, whether it's IBC and things like that. Now, IBC norms has the Indian industry widely divided. It's very, very polarized on that. Which side of this entire debate are you on? Because there are many out there who believe that by barring promoters who haven't been able to cough up the cash, we are going to see significant asset value depression. But there are others who believe that this change of promoter-banker equation was much warranted, is required.
I be very honest, I really do not believe that prior promoters should be allowed to come back in the fray.
Why do you say so?
You know, it's not simply about shuffling assets. It's about what is the incentive given. What the government is trying to signal is they want business to be run responsibly. Therefore, there has to be some kind of incentive and disincentive for performance or the lack thereof. And so I think if the general public sees that there is merely a larger methodology being used to reduce the liabilities, and then you find the same promoters in charge, there could be a large public outcry against it, saying there is a very large game going on. I don't think the government should risk that loss of credibility at this point. And look, there are enough entrepreneurs, there's enough
Willing to
new
put in the
capital
money,
coming to put in
yes.
the money. And the other entrepreneurs, if they, the ones who have been moved out of their assets, if they recover and they have investment funds to invest, by all means start new businesses.
So the IMF today says and shares your optimism perhaps that India will regain the fastest growing economy title in 2018, and in 2019 we're likely to grow at 7.4%, which means that we'll have to grow at very robust rates going forward. Apart from the private sector investment that you spoke about, which needs that flywheel, what are the other sources of that growth going to be? We're already seeing crude turn, which is a global tailwind, but turn into a headwind for India.
I just said a little while ago that I think we should look in a little more sanguine manner at the oil price rise.
Yes.
I think the oil price rise has come just in time to allow global growth to recover because of the commodity producing countries recovering. They were major importers of goods from countries like India and China. So the global deceleration of growth to a large extent was due to the oil producing countries slump. I think that is not really a tailwind. It may be a headwind in disguise. The question is, how high will those prices go? If they start shooting up the way they had earlier, which I thought was unreasonable, then we have a problem. I think there is enough shale oil in America. It's
True.
like a switch. The Americans just have to
temper
flip the
these
switch
prices,
to
yes.
temper these prices. So if they remain fairly stable from now on where they are, I think they could actually be a headwind. But you asked the question, what else? As far as India is concerned, look, I think rural demand has always fueled India. I see that returning. There were adverse terms of trade for Indian farmers because prices and inflation had gone up of ordinary goods more than food items, and therefore they were suffering. The government has taken action to raise MSPs, market support prices, which I think is going to help farmers as well. And we are seeing a return to some robust demand from the rural areas too. That should be a nice fillip for the Indian economy.
So that means that the consumption story can at least make a comeback.
again.
I want to ask you on the GST. Obviously, it's a huge reform. It's taken almost a decade in the making. It is obviously very disruptive. It has had its teething troubles to begin with. I personally believe that the government has been very proactive in addressing some of those, at least the GST Council. By when do you believe the GST-induced pain and slowdown is going to ebb?
I'm not really an astrologer or an expert to know exactly when.
But from a business point
But
of view.
I have been a votary of this for a long
Yes.
time. I've been pushing for it. I've been critical that we've taken too long to do it. It was needed. I used to say that, look, we are a country that doesn't even have its own common market.
That's right.
We are not utilizing our own strength. So these teething troubles are happening because, frankly, if you tried to reach perfection before you implemented it, it would never happen. But I'm seeing tremendous flexibility on part of the council and the government and the council, not just the government. Let me give you one simple example. Used cars.
Yes.
The prices, the duties had been raised dramatically on that. And initially there seemed to be a flawless logic for that. That look, why shouldn't they bear the same duty as on new cars?
Yeah.
What they didn't realize was this is really a second kind of sale, and what it does is fuel new car sales. So if you don't have the ability to exchange cars in an organized dealership, then you're going to slow down the process of new cars. That wasn't visible at that time.
Sure.
What happened as a result of high duties was that the entire used car trade went back into the unorganized sector. It was going back in the past. Representations were made, and I was delighted to see that they have actually reduced the prices, the duties again. So in fact, to my mind, that shows that there is a very flexible, rational and open council there. They will solve the problems. Those teething troubles will go away. But the logistics benefits, I think, are going to kick in probably even in the next 6 months.
Mr. Mahindra, because you spoke about vehicles, I just want to move on quickly to the electric vehicle segment. Very ambitious and tall, claims being made there. All electric vehicle market by 2030. Is that a realistic assumption at all to begin with? And do you believe we have the necessary ecosystem, the infrastructure? And if not, then obviously it needs to be done on war footing.
We have a well-known methodology in corporate transformations. That when you want to bring about great change and transformation, then the war cry that you put out there is not objective and never based on data. It's based on aspiration. It's based on passion. So let's say that what Piyush Goyal did when I think he was the first to talk about 2030 as that it was an aspiration. If you ask him, he'll tell you the same thing. That look, I brought it up saying this is what we would want. This is a dream. Will
Let's
we
get
re-
it somewhere close to it.
we really don't know. And as everyone says that if you don't shoot for going to Mars, you won't reach the moon.
That's right.
So the question is, should we be critical of something that looks very fanciful? I've said right from the beginning, it's about time we had aspirations in this country. We have been a country that has been poor. Our poverty has not been a wealth but of aspiration.
True.
So why are we knocking people if they say 2030? Acha nahi ho gaya 2030. Maybe it'll take 20 years more. But we will never get even 10 million cars
If we
on the
don't have
way
a
if we don't have
timeline.
if we don't have a target and an aspiration.
But will an ambitious bet like that be possible without the fiscal incentives, without the government subsidy? Because we have seen that those kind of sobs have always fueled those markets.
Let me put it this way: that kind of penetration of the market by electric vehicles will never happen if they are dependent on subsidies. They cannot. You have to let the free market reign and let markets decide what consumers want. That's when you get real growth. So the question is, again, it's like a flywheel. What does the government do to get people to taste electric cars, to test them out, to feel them? That's when you initially need some kind of incentive given. You also need incentive as technology takes us down the learning curve in terms of battery manufacture. At some point, battery costs will come down to a level where they will be equivalent to gasoline cars.
Right.
And so until then is when the government may need to look at incentives, state governments and others. But post that, really you cannot depend on subsidies. I believe electric cars are going to be here to stay, and technology will lead us to their dominance.
Like in the rest of the world, there is a huge debate on joblessness in India. And in fact, many people believe that perhaps is the only Achilles heel of this government. I know you have a very contrarian view on that. So first let me hear that view and then I'm going to ask you the question.
No, it's again representative of my terminal optimism, if you will. It may not be a rational argument, but I think there is a kernel of objectivity in it. And that is that a lot of the growth that is happening in this new age economy is entrepreneurial. It's happening in rural areas. With road construction, mobile connectivity, you're seeing a dramatic jump in non-agricultural rural income. That is growing by leaps and bounds because families are becoming double or triple income. Through the mobile, through easier connectivity, they're creating all sorts of businesses. Those kinds of businesses are not yet making their way into the books, if you will, into the statistics. When they do, you might find that the distress is in fact perhaps less than what people imagine. And I'm hoping that India will benefit from job growth in two ways. And I call it a bifocal approach. We are going to need those coastal economic zones that the Niti Aayog spoke
That's right,
of.
yes.
Two on either side of the coast, because we are ready to inherit the mantle of special economic zones from China.
True.
They're getting expensive now. The world will move to our economic zones if we
And we need to be ready.
if we create the ones which are which rival the Shenzhens and Guangdongs in scale. So you will get that kind of the conventional manufacturing will move from China to India if we have those. But that won't be enough because the world is moving back to proximate local manufacturing. There's insularity, there's protectionism. How do we get organic job growth here? I think it's going to be through massive entrepreneurialization of the economy, to the flourishing of small entrepreneurs in rural areas, to
And you
all
believe
kinds
to
of
some
business.
extent that's happening.
I have evidence of that. I've given it in talks. I've talked about, for example, if you go on site, there are 3 or 4 gifting sites today.
That's right.
Where you see people are using 3D printing to actually give you Diwali gifts, which are bespoke. And you can order them, and these are people in tier 2 or tier 3 cities. And you can order them today. I've even named one once called makewhale.com. And this site is using the internet as a shop window. Earlier, they could never reach their markets. But today, everyone has a shop window.
Yeah, the
it's a
dynamics have
fundamental
completely
change in commerce. So when you have a shop window, and not just local but the world, and you have 3D printing that can make artisanal products, make them to scale, think of the dynamics and how they will change. So I'm hoping that that will actually provide much more employment than we had been initially envisaging.
So two quick
I'll
last
have to-
questions.
I'll
Two
have
quick
to
last
return.
questions. I'm just taking
I'll
a
have
two.
to run.
Okay, I'm going to come one quick last question. Your tweets are rather interesting and very incisive. Do you do them on your own?
you know, what did I say? Somebody asked me that the other day, but I just said, look, if you look at some of my quotes, if they're not my own, there's some doppelganger, some clone of me out there, and I better find him because he's on the loose. I don't think I would trust anyone to make those kinds of personal comments that I do.
Is there anything better than being a granddad or a newlywed at that?
No, I'm still looking, but I don't think I'll find anything to beat that.
Thank you very much,
Thank
sir.
you.
Such a pleasure.
Thank you.